So welcome to Adult Education at Temple Kol Ami Emmanuel, powered by IJKL. Today's presentation is given by Dr. Sandra Lilienthal, entitled Holding the Bitter with the Sweet. Dr. Lilienthal, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Henry. I am going to put up a PowerPoint just so that you know this will be sent to everyone. So you do not have to worry. You don't have to take notes. You don't have to copy anything. You will have everything that you need. This thing that I just did here was really cool. I found out from somebody else that I have my image right in front of my my slides. So if it works for you, great. If it doesn't, let me know and I will take that down.
It's wonderful.
I thought it was so cool.
It's very.
Yeah, I learned it recently. So as you can see, the image that I chose to use is this intertwined, twisted image. And the reason I did this is because I think to a very, very big extent, every single one of us feels somehow that everything is mixed in our hearts, in our souls, and it's been a really difficult year. I know that for many people, October 7th was the anniversary of what happened last year in Israel. And you might or not know that there was a big discussion in Israel about when should we commemorate this? Should we commemorate it based on the official civil year, or commemorate it on the Jewish date? Obviously, Jewish holidays are celebrated on Jewish dates, and Jewish commemorations such as Tisha B'Av or the ghetto situation in Warsaw, etc., is also celebrated or commemorated, I'm sorry, on Jewish dates. And in Israel, they decided that they were going to take it out of the Jewish date and that they were going to celebrate it in a secular date. That's how it became October 7th. So for most people, the first anniversary of last year's tragedy has already passed. Some of us are not there. I am one of those. And I will tell you why. For me, this date will never be October 7th. It will always be the day that I was in synagogue for a specific religious holiday, and I got the news of what was going on. So just like we all remember exactly where we were on 9/11, some people remember exactly where they were when Kennedy was shot. I remember vividly what happened on the day that I was in synagogue for Shmini Atzeret services. I'm going to discuss Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in a second, where my husband, who usually comes to shul later than I do, we go to different prayer groups. So mine starts at 8 o'clock and his starts at 10. He usually shows up at 10 to 10. And he came at 8:30 and went in, called me out. I went out and he said, Israel is being attacked. And I said, what exactly does that mean? And he gave me an idea of what was happening. Now, he gave me a very basic idea because we do not use technology in a Jewish holiday. So this is now October 7th, 8:30 in the morning, and I hear what's going on. I have one child who lives in Israel, married with 2 little kids, and I have another child who was with her husband visiting my oldest daughter. So at that moment, I have 2 children in Israel. I do not have access to technology. I do not know what is happening, and I cannot call my children. So I don't have to tell you that these were the most horrible hours, basically 36 hours, until the end of October 8th, when I could pick up my phone and call my children. And I did so even though it was 2 o'clock in the morning in Israel, because I needed to hear their voices. But the reason I'm sharing this with you, everybody has their own story of where they were and how they reacted, is that it completely impacted my holiday observance. Because that day was Shmini Atzeret. The next day for me was Simchat Torah, where you're supposed to be dancing and you're supposed to be happy. And there was no way that I could dance, that I could be happy. This whole thing was like, I was so angry at the fact that I had a holiday where I had to be dancing or being happy, and it just didn't work that way. Okay, it passed. I obviously did not have a holiday observance in any reasonable way. But now we're approaching that first year because we're going into Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah again, starting Wednesday night. And it's a year later. And it should be different. It should be easier. And let's face it, what happened this week with the elimination of Sinwar should have basically made me happier, but I'm not there. And I know that I'm not the only one. So that's why we decided that we were going to do this session today. And what I would like to do is, we're going to start with the introduction, which I did. We're going to talk a little bit about Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. Then we're going to go into some texts, and then we are going to look at these sources that we're going to look at are sources that talk about how do you handle the bitter and the sweet. And you will see that this is not something new. We have tons of sources that approach this. That's what we're going to be doing. And we're going to understand the philosophical perspectives that come with these texts. So first, I just want to point out to the developments of Simchat Torah. Shmini Atzeret is a holiday in the Torah, right? So Sukkot is a holiday that lasts 7 days. The first day is a holiday. In the diaspora, many communities observe first and second day as a full holiday. And then you have another 6 or 5 days of Sukkot. The last day of Sukkot is called Hoshana Rabbah, and it is not technically a holiday in the sense that you can't use technology or drive or etc. Okay? Now, when we think of Simchat Torah, is there anything about Simchat Torah in the Torah? And the answer is no. In any other book? And the answer is no. So in the Bible, in the Jewish Bible, there is absolutely no mention of Simchat Torah. Of Shmini Atzeret, yes. Of Simchat Torah, no. When we go into Mishnah, which is the foundational text on which the entire Talmud is going to be built, what we know, and it's the only indication, is that at the end of Sukkot, there was a public gathering of people to hear the king read the Torah. So there is a short linking here of reading the Torah with Sukkot, not with Shmini Atzeret. Then we move to the Gemara, which is the next step, the commentary on the Mishnah, and they together will become the Talmud. Gemara says that the end of the Torah should be read on this day. What day? Oh, at the end of the Sukkot or Shmini Atzeret. Now, we also have to understand that the reading of the Torah was done differently in Babylonia and in Israel. In Babylonia, people read the Torah in 1 year, which is what you will see today in Orthodox synagogues. So you start the Torah right after Simchat Torah with Genesis, with Bereshit, reading creation, etc. And you finish the Torah after a year with the death of Moses. But that was in Babylonia. In Israel, the Torah was read throughout a period of 3 years. Now, it is similar to what is done today in most Reform and conservative synagogues, which is a triennial cycle, but it is not the same. And the reason it is not the same is because today, Reform and conservative, what they do is we read 1/3, let's say, of the Torah portion of Genesis this year. This next year, we're going to read the second third. And on year 3, we're going to read the third third. That's not how it was in Israel in Talmudic times. In Talmudic times, it was you read the first third of Bereshit this week. Next week, you read the second third of Bereshit. The following week, you read the third third of Bereshit. And then you went into Noach, which is the second portion. And then you read first third, second third, last third, and so on. Which means it took them 3 years to finish reading the Torah. Okay, so it's interesting that we know that the Torah should be read on the last day, but we also know the last day of Sukkot or on Shmini Atzeret, it's not clear, but we also know that they weren't reading the same thing. Now then, in the 8th century, in a midrash called Shir HaShirim Rabbah, which is a commentary on Song of Songs, it says that when one finishes reading the Torah, there should be a celebration. Now, I hope that what you're seeing is how customs evolve. So I have nothing in the Torah. In the Mishnah, I have something about the king reading the Torah. And then in the Gemara, I hear something about we should have a certain reading of the Torah at that time. And then in the 8th century Midrash, it says, well, we should have a party when we finish reading the Torah. And it is only in the 11th century that Simchat Torah becomes a holiday as we understand it today. And in Israel, in the land of Israel, because there is no second day of holidays, with the exception of Rosh Hashanah, that holiday of Shmini Atzeret has become Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah. It's one day, which is why we say that October 7th happened on Simchat Torah. But truthfully, for those of us living in the diaspora who were keeping 2 different days, it did not happen in Simchat Torah. It happened in Shmini Atzeret. Okay? So I just want to make it clear that Simchat Torah is a very recent holiday. It was in the 11th century that people started talking about the fact that, oh, we should have a party and it should be this day and this is the reading that we should have. And we're going to call up somebody that will have the Aliyah, the last reading of the Torah, and then somebody else that will have another Aliyah, which is the first reading of Bereshit, etc. So what we have today is a fairly new holiday. Done with my teaching about Jewish tradition and Jewish development. I now want to go into this idea of the bitter and the sweet. So as we always do, we are going to start from Bible, and then we're going to move on to other texts. This is from Kohelet. Kohelet is Ecclesiastes. Many synagogues actually read Kohelet on Sukkot. It is a book that is written according to tradition by King Solomon in his later years. So he was approaching the end of his life. And here are 2 quotes from chapter 3. One is verse 1, one is verse 4 from that book. Quotes that you are familiar with. Even if you didn't know it comes from the book of Ecclesiastes, I know you are familiar with the text. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. And then in verse 4, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing. Now I'm going to stop my share. And I want to ask you, you can either put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and I'll call you. I want to ask you, how do you understand this text? Meaning, when I read that there is a time for laughter and a time for tears, a time for joy and a time for sorrow, what are we actually saying here? And how do we feel about this compartmentalization, I think that's the word, of feelings? So it's on you guys now. You can put it in the chat, you can raise your hands. I'd like to hear how you understand this text. Bobby said yin and yang of life. Great. Henry.
Sometimes you get sugar, sometimes you get lemons. Deal with it.
Okay. life has ups and downs, and that the good and bad is constantly changing. Gina, it is part of a song. I don't think it's Simon and Garfunkel. Americans, help me here, but it is part of a song.
It's the birds.
Thank you. Okay. How else? Any other comment on how you
It wa-
understand? Marilyn?
Sorry, it was the birds, but it was written by Bob Dylan. Okay,
Ah.
go on. Go on.
Thank you, Bobby.
Our poet laureate. Okay.
Oh, and thank you, Joyce, for actually putting the link. Marilyn?
It doesn't say you shouldn't, but if you're mourning, there's a time, let's say 30 days a year, then you have to start laughing again. You can't bury your whole life on one side. It isn't fair to you or your family or your friends. You got to get on with life. On the other hand, if everything is so great all the time, you've got to understand it's not always going to be like that. And you have to be strong enough to accept the opposite.
Okay. Thank you, Marilyn. Joan? You're muted, Joan.
I see it as the tree of life. The way God created the world, nothing can exist without its complement.
Excellent. Excellent. But I have a question for you. Based on how we are saying that we understand this text, what do I do with Simchat Torah now? Is Simchat Torah, especially this year, a time of laughter and dance? Or is Simchat Torah now a time of weeping and mourning?
I think it's different dealing with a situation like that. Losing a relative is one thing and getting over it, but this is universal. It affects the whole world almost. And we have to be very careful not to destroy more. He was destroyed. Let's try not to continue destroying. Let's go on the other side and start to build. One death doesn't mean we should make 10 more deaths.
The wedding procession takes priority over the funeral procession.
Stan, say that again.
They say the wedding procession has the right of way over the funeral procession.
Excellent. If you have two processions, right? And it's a narrow bridge here. Who goes first? The wedding procession will go first, and then the funeral procession. Excellent. Joyce, we must experience the joy that is possible at this time through our tears. So I am actually going to, and Barbara, I saw you had your hand up, so I want you to speak before I say anything.
I was actually going to say something very similar to Stan, that I was thinking of in Israel, the celebration first of, I can't remember the holiday, but the holiday, no, the holiday that just comes before the Independence Day celebration.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Israel has Yom HaZikaron.
Yom HaZikaron, and then right away, the celebration of independence. So from sadness to celebration. And I think that we must do both.
Amazing, which by the way, was a conscious decision also. I mean, Yom HaTzmaut is when Yom HaTzmaut is, right? But Yom HaZikaron was chosen. The date was chosen. There is no specific thing that happened that day before. They chose the date a day before Yom HaTzmaut purposely so that we could have that bitter and then move on to the sweet, right? Excellent. By the way, there are many people who love the fact that it was put together, and there are many people that hate it and say, how can you have me go after mourning for my child, my spouse, my parent that was killed in a war or in a terrorist attack? How can you expect me to have this day where we're crying for their death And then I can, okay, now guys, let's dance. It's like they say, it's very difficult, but excellent comment. Marsha.
Yeah, and I mean, when we sit Shiva, there's a much more gradual re-entry, the 7 days and then the 30, and really there are things you are not supposed to rejoice in, not do. So I kind of see what those two observances put close together. On the one hand, it's like saying you must be aware that joy will come again, that you can't give up, but there does seem to be more wisdom in the idea of focusing on the sadness with a knowledge and with an assurance and with a faith that this too shall pass. Just like when you're in good times, the awareness that this too shall pass is to remind you, enjoy where you are, because that might pass. And in sad times, just make sure you hold on to the knowledge that there will be something else for you. So
yeah, Debbie?
When you're lighting the yurtsite candle for that person who died and you're lighting it the night before, it's a reminder during the day. So there's that push-pull there also.
Great. I am going to get to that. Thank you for pointing that out. I'm just going to make a very slight correction. Actually, it's not a correction. It's just an explanation of what you said. We light a yahrzeit candle on the person's actual yahrzeit, and that is not what Debbie was referring to. If I understand correctly, Debbie's referring to the Yizkor candle that we light, which is the same candle, but technically speaking, we don't call it yahrzeit. It's a Yizkor candle that we light before the day that we say Yizkor in synagogue. And Debbie, you are correct. That is one of the things that I'm going to point out later, that Yizkor comes a few times a year. One of them is Yom Kippur. So what I'm going to say now doesn't apply to that one, but the other 3 times, it comes on joyous days. That's exactly it. It's joyous days. It is Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, right? So Shmini Atzeret, basically. But yes, so that is exactly one of the things that I'm going to bring down as to show that we've been there before. And what was said, what Stan said also about the funeral processions coming. So we're going to see that this is not new. This conversation about having to deal with the bitter and the sweet is not something that happened now and that we are having to figure it out on our own, because we have had to figure this out earlier. So let me go back to my screen sharing, and I'm going to show you here. And we're going to go to the next source. Now, this is from the book of Ezra. And I know that the font here is a little small, but bear with me. This is what it says. When the builders had laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, priests in their vestments with trumpets and Levites, son of Asaph, with cymbals were stationed to give praise to the Lord as King David of Israel had ordained. They sang songs extolling and praising the Lord, for he is good, his steadfast love for Israel is eternal. All the people raised a great shout extolling the Lord because the foundation of the house of the Lord had been laid. Many of the priests and Levites and the chiefs of the clans, the old men who had seen the first house, wept loudly at the sight of the founding of the house. Many others shouted joyously at the top of their voices. The people could not distinguish the shouts of joy from the people's weeping, for the people raised a great shout, the sound of which could be heard from afar. Explanation of the context of this text. Ezra is writing at the time when people have returned from Babylonia after the destruction of the first temple. They were exiled. 80 years later, they are allowed to come back. and they rebuild the temple. Now, after they lay the foundation of the second temple, there is a big party. Everybody is singing, and there is music and instruments and etc. And there is so much joy. But at the same time, there are people who are crying. And the people who are crying are the ones who had seen the first temple, and they say, this is nothing like the first temple was. I'm going to stop my share again, and I'm going to ask another question to you. What do you think this means? Now, I gave you the history, but when it has that passage, and I can put it up again so we'll read it, but when we see that passage that there are people weeping and there are people in joy, singing, etc., which one is being heard? Are they both being heard at the same time? Is one overpowering the other? Which one is overpowering? So I want your opinion, and then I'll give you the rabbinic interpretation of this, okay? So just raise your hand, or remember that I cannot see your hand when I'm sharing a screen. So you're gonna either have to raise a hand like the actual Zoom hand, or just unmute and start talking. You understand my question, right? What I want to know is, when you look at the old, at the text here, all the people raised a great shout extolling the Lord because they're so happy. But the old men who had seen the first house wept loudly. And then it says the people could not distinguish the shouts of joy from the people's weeping, for the people raised a great shout, the sound of which could be heard from afar. What is it that we are hearing?
Tears of joy.
Say that again.
Tears of joy.
Tears of joy. Amazing. Anybody else? Freda?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's showing generational differences. The older folks can remember the past, and the newer folks are much more into the present day.
Okay, and Gina just wrote, both grief and happiness have power. So here's what's interesting. The text is the text is the text. But as you know, rabbinic commentators come with their interpretations. So Rashi says, joy was so loud that it overpowered the sound of cry. So yes, there was crying, but the joy overtook the cry. Metsudat David, who is another commentator, says that the people would have really cheered much more. But because the sound of crying was still heard, even if from far away, it dampened the happy cheer. Now, these are two very opposite readings. One basically says the joy overpowered the crying. The other one says the crying took away from the joy. What they have in common, both of these commentaries, is that the two opposite feelings were there.
I don't think so.
What, Marilyn?
My mother used to say about a person, he's laughing with yashings. That was a Yiddish expression. These people that are laughing could be laughing on the outside, but not on the inside. So it could be just an act to try and lift up the society.
So I am actually going to skip a slide. I'll go back to the slide because of what you just said, Marilyn. Okay, I will go back. I'm just skipping. This is from the Zohar, one of the most important mystical texts that we have. Weeping is lodged in one side of my heart, and joy is lodged in the other. So this also compartmentalizes the joy and the weeping. But it says they're both in my heart. It may be that my heart has one side and another side. It may be that they're not completely mingled, but they both are living in my heart.
Dr. Sandra, there's also the teaching that when we cry, we shed a tear of joy and a tear of sorrow, which is why we have two eyes.
Correct. Because joy and sorrow, according to Judaism, come together. Elisa? Unmute, Lisa. You're still muted. Okay.
I was taught at a very young age that we are, and I actually experienced this myself. I can laugh and cry at the same time. It's a mixture of emotions that are perhaps overwhelming, but there are moments we wouldn't know joy if we didn't know sorrow, and vice versa. So that was something that was drummed into my little head from a very young age, that we can laugh and cry at the same time, and there's nothing wrong with it. We know both feelings.
By the way, leaving aside Jewish philosophy, which is important, and that's what we're doing here, but leaving that aside, how quickly does a child switch from crying to laughter or from laughter to crying? They're not that different.
No.
They're not that different. They are very close together, right? And this is just a, I guess, anatomical, whatever definition here. This is not Jewish thought. This is just a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Marilyn Gross.
So I see this, the crying and the shouting blending together, but also influencing each other and learning from each other. And then that next slide you just showed is such a graphic for it, because the blood flows from one side right into the other and through the whole body and back again, and it's constantly mixing. And so I think we learn from that. We've got to remember, but we've got to move on.
So you just said, when you first started speaking, I don't remember exactly the terms that you used, but I want to show you a Talmudic text that says exactly what you said now, which is so important, right? Which is these things both have to be validated, both have a point, both exist, both are important, and they almost help each other, right? They're not necessarily just clashing. They help each other. So now I'm going to go back to that slide that I skipped before. Here we are. This is a Talmudic story. It talks about a bunch of rabbis that go to Jerusalem, and when they get there, they see that the temple has been destroyed. And they rent their garments, which is a sign of mourning, of course. And when they get to the actual Temple Mount, they see a fox that is coming out from the Holy of Holies, which is that sacred place that is so holy that it is only entered by one person, the high priest, and only once a year, which is on Yom Kippur. So they began weeping. 3 rabbis, Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Yeshua, they're all crying. And the 4th rabbi, Rabbi Akiva, that was with them, is laughing. Now, they're looking at a sign of a destruction, of really terrible destruction. And the 3 rabbis look at him and say, "Why are you laughing?" And Rabbi Akiva says, "Why are you crying?" So they explain to him, "Why are we crying? It's obvious. This is such a holy place. And now foxes are walking. We shouldn't cry." Rabbi Akiva says, "That's exactly why I'm laughing." So wait a minute. They're looking at the exact same thing. And one group is crying, Rabbi Akiva is laughing, and now he's going to explain. Now that the prophecy of Uriah was fulfilled, that Jerusalem would become rubble, that the Temple Mount would be like a forest where foxes are found, it is evident that the prophecy of Zechariah, that there shall be elderly men and elderly women sitting in the streets of Jerusalem, remains valid. And then the Gemara adds, the sages, meaning the first three rabbis, said to him, Kiva, you have comforted us. Now, this is a very weird story, but the point of the story is that there was a prophecy that Jerusalem would be destroyed and there would be foxes walking around, which is a horrible prophecy. But there's also a prophecy that Jerusalem would be rebuilt. One group is looking at the destruction and saying, oh my goodness, everything that our prophet said would happen has happened, we are doomed. Rabbi Akiva says, ha, if that prophecy happened, the other prophecies of rebuilding will also happen. How lucky are we that we can see that prophecies are fulfilled? That's how Rabbi Akiva is looking at it. My point being that there's no question that the destruction of the temple, especially for these rabbis, was reason for terrible pain. And it's not that Rabbi Akiva is not in pain. Rabbi Akiva is in as much pain as the other three rabbis. But what he has here is the ability to find some joy in the midst of the pain and the sorrow. Find something that gives him joy in the midst of the tragedy. And when he shares it with the other three rabbis, what is their answer? You have comforted us. This has been helpful. And we start understanding that as important as it is to have the opportunity to mourn, to cry, to register our pain, there is also something positive that comes out of every experience of pain. And Bobby and Marilyn, it's perspective, which Bobby said in a different way, is your cup half full or half empty? But even if you can see the cup completely empty at a certain point, it is the ability to understand that something positive can come out of the horrible pain that we are going through. Now, I want you to understand that this does not mean, at least that's not what I mean, that, oh, it's good that something horrible happened because now something good is going to happen. That's not what I'm saying. It is not good. It is terrible. We realize that it is terrible. We say that it is terrible. But I also ask myself, what good can come out of this horrible, tremendous situation that we are going through? Now, as you guys have pointed out before, this idea that we hold these things together. Joanne, you have a comment? Unmute if that is so.
I don't want to interrupt you. I just
not interrupting. It's participating.
I was just going to say, from my own personal experience, when I was sitting Shiva for my mother, I was in such a state of sadness. But what came out of it was stories that people told me that I didn't know, and people sharing wonderful things about her that in all the years she was alive, I didn't know. So that's just another example. Another instance, we had somebody come to the temple to talk to us about,
October 7th. And one of the questions I had for him is, how do children handle, this? Do they have any kind of normalcy? And he said, children are incredible. He said, taking my children to the shelter, they're anxious, but they come out and they're playing again, and it's like nothing happened. So that's just another example of how even little kids can deal with the sad and the happy.
Right. The only thing I will add to this is let's not forget that these kids are resilient, and yes, they go out of the shelter and they immediately go out to play, but that the level of trauma and anxiety that this generation is going to have is not, we can't even begin to understand. So yes, they are resilient and they go on with life, but it's not without a huge cost. I just want to point this out because I don't want it to seem that, oh, they go into the shelter and then they go to play and everything is good. It's not. There's a lot of trauma coming in there. But yes, they are able to hold that, the joy and the sorrow together, or the fear and the happiness together. Perfect. Now, you guys mentioned, it wasn't even me, right? The fact that, but Judaism has always done this. So for example, we have several rituals where we hold the joy and the sorrow together. One, which is probably the most well-known, is the breaking of a glass at a wedding, with the explanation that even at the happiest time of a couple, we still have to remember the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem. So we have this incredible wedding ceremony. Everybody is thrilled. Everybody is happy. Everybody is getting ready to go dance. And we say, just a second, let's make a little parenthesis here and remember that the temple was destroyed. On the other hand, so here we have happiness and we add a little bit of the sorrow. On the other hand, we have another ritual that is the opposite, right? Which is this idea that I will not allow myself to rejoice over bad things that happen to other people. And so we take 10 drops of wine out of our glass at our Seder to remember that others were suffering, which is actually quite interesting and timely because I have gone through, I don't know how many posts on Facebook after this holiday, this 3-day holiday for me, of people asking the question, are we allowed to celebrate the death of Sinwar? Because we weren't allowed to celebrate the death of the Egyptians in the sea. So can we celebrate this death? But that's another issue. The point is that we have rituals where we actually mix joy and sorrow. And Marilyn, before I give you the word, another one is exactly as was pointed earlier, Yizkor, where Shmini Atzeret, Pesach, Shavuot, which are festive holidays, we say festive holiday, but I'm going to remember those who passed. And so I light a yahrzeit candle and I say Yizkor in synagogue. So we have traditions throughout our history that mix these two things together. Marilyn.
I didn't raise my hand, but I'm thinking, Bin fovo yivcha al tismach. In the Pirkei Avot, it said, laugh not when your enemy falls.
Exactly. Marilyn Gross.
So both of those examples you showed involve wine. And we think of wine as a happy thing. We use it to celebrate Shabbat. But also in the Bible, God's cup of wine can represent being punished and God's anger at us. So that same thing has opposite moods for us.
Great. It's again bringing the same thing that can be happy, but it can be sad. So Joyce, thank you for clarifying that. We are going to get to Kululam in 1 second. I promise you, And it's not that video, but it's another one. MJ, a glass at a wedding represented how we as a people were shattered yet not destroyed. Yes, but still, that is a bad thing, not good, right? By the way, the real reason why we break a glass at a wedding is none of these reasons that I brought in right now. That is what the rabbis teach us. The real reason was the superstition. The origin of this custom is from superstition that at a wedding, because it's a very happy moment, evil spirits will be coming around because they don't like when we're happy. And so we're going to do something that makes noise because noise scares them away. That is the original reason. But since the rabbis don't use that and they use a much nicer reason, I'm going to stick to the rabbinic answer. I just want you to know that historically speaking, it comes from superstition. But okay, so I love a fragility of joy. Actually, fragility of joy is also the theme of Sukkot, right? The joy in fragility and the fragility of joy, meaning you think you are safe in your house with walls, you are not. And you're going to learn how to be happy in a hut that has absolutely no permanence. So yes, that is also the topic of the holiday we're celebrating. So, or we're in the middle of celebrating. Okay, so now I want to go into a text written by Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik. Many of you know who he was, one of the most famous 20th century Orthodox rabbis in the United States. He wrote a book. He wrote many books, but one book that he wrote was about this dialectical situation. So he starts with his philosophy based on the fact that there are two stories of Adam. There is one creation story that says that Adam and Eve are created together, and then they're split into two beings. And then there is the other one that says that Adam is created from earth, and then that God takes his rib and creates a woman. So because there are two stories, Rabbi Soloveitchik, analyzing those stories, says that man is a dialectical being living in a dialectical world. It is God's desire that man be in a perpetual state of ontological tension and perplexity. Man is condemned to living a life in which irreconcilable tensions exist and will always exist, regardless of his efforts to solve them. And even though this was not written about joy and sorrow, I think it applies to that really well. This tension is a part of life. There will be joy, there will be sorrow. They cannot be reconciled. We cannot say, you know what, let's make it all one. These are two important and opposite feelings that we will have to learn to live with side by side. Lorelei.
Hi, it's Bob.
Hi, Bob.
I'm reminded of a saying, and you'll probably tell me where it comes from, that says, pray as if everything depended on God, but act as if everything depended on you. It recognizes a dichotomy of living in a spiritual and in a secular world.
And that is one of the dichotomies. Perfect, right? I mean, dichotomy is over everywhere. For example, I have a physical body and I have to tend to the needs of my physical body. But I also have a soul. And as important as my soul is, so is my body, because without the body, I can't have a soul. So, and they want dialectically opposite things. My soul wants all of the, you know, when I say religious, I do not mean religious as an observance. I mean religious as in connection with a greater force, a greater God. And my body wants, no, I just want chocolate cake. Give me pizza, give me chocolate cake. Just let me have fun. And what do I want to have a relationship with God? What for? And I live in the tension of those two worlds. Great. And I love what has been put there. What Linda said, we have to believe that God is in both places. Yes, God is in the joy. God is in the sorrow. By the way, we should say a blessing when something good happens to us. According to the Talmud, we should say a blessing when something bad happens to us. right? Because we recognize that God is in these two places. So I'm now going to leave this philosophical world and come back to where we are now. We now are approaching the first anniversary of October 7th in the Jewish calendar. And it will happen at a time when we have a very happy holiday. And for many of us, we will be wondering, how the heck am I supposed to do this? How am I supposed to dance? How am I supposed to remember what happened? So it's interesting because Joyce mentioned that the link that she posted was about the Israeli group Kululam singing a song by Naomi Shemer. I am going to share exactly that with you. Kululam singing a song of Naomi Shemer. However, it's a different song. And before I put it up, I want to say this song is, quote, old. You know, old is very relative, of course, but it is old. It was written in 1976. It was written specifically for a music festival that happens every year on Yom HaAtzmaut, and it was written for a specific vocal group called Hakol Over Habibi, but this was now recorded after October 7th by Kululam. I don't have to say anything other than share this with you. I'm going to make sure that we have sound here, hopefully. So here we go. If this doesn't work for you, let me know, please, but I think it will. Pay attention to the words of the song.
להתחיל מבראשית, מישראל, יוצא לדרך.
Can't see the words, Sandra, your head is in the way.
If my head is in the way, give me a second and I will take my head out and share this again from where we were. Thank you for letting me know.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. And now I just need to. song actually became something completely different for me. The idea that we rebuild. We get up in the morning, we sing again, we sing with pain. That is why this whole song is so meaningful to me. We sing with pain. The pain is going to be there forever. But we are going to start again. We are going to rebuild. We are going to rebuild not just physically, we are going to rebuild ourselves. That to me is really important. And I'm not done. I want to point out a couple more things. I'm going to go back to my share. So this was the song. You will get the link to the videos. Don't worry. Again, the Zohar, there is no greater light than the light that emerges from darkness. We have gone through a year of hell, of pure darkness. But there is no greater light that comes from the darkness that we went through. And to me, that is what we are going to be doing this year. We are going to be birthing this light that comes from the darkness we experience. Now, before we conclude, I came across this literally 2 weeks ago. When we say we have been there before, we all understand what it means we have been there before, right? Oh, they tried to kill us, we survived. I'm not going to say let's eat. It's something that's how we see we have been there before. But I came across something and I wasn't sure it was true. So I actually had to research it, and I did. In 1655, in Krakow, it was Simchat Torah. This is the synagogue. It was Simchat Torah. And they had the first hakafah, the first dancing with the Torah. And they had the second hakafah. And they had the third hakafah. And as they are about to start the fourth hakafah, they hear sounds outside. Horses. Now, horses coming to your synagogue is a sign of a pogrom. They come in the middle of Simchat Torah, and they destroy everything. A year later, a few weeks before Simchat Torah, people go to the rabbi and they ask the rabbi, how are we going to do this? How are we supposed to celebrate Simchat Torah this year? And the rabbi says to them, this is how we are going to do it. We are going to have the first hakafah. We're going to have the second hakafah. We are going to have the third hakafah. We're then going to stop. We're going to sit on the floor. We are going to be in the dark, just like we do on Tisha B'Av. We are going to spend a couple of moments mourning the pogrom of last year, the lives that we lost. And then we're going to go back to dancing. And we will do the fourth hakafah, the fifth hakafah, the sixth hakafah, the seventh hakafah. Now, I think this is fundamentally important, and I will tell you why I think this is so important. Let me give you a quote that is not necessarily a Jewish quote. It takes moral courage to grieve. It takes religious courage to rejoice. I want you to understand that we honor our grief and we mark it in many different ways. But we must build the courage to rejoice, not despite, but because of the sadness in the world. We need to make time for more happiness. We need to recognize the blessings. We need to see the joy so that we can be inspired to build the world that we want. When we say Judaism has survived in spite of everything, Jewish survival isn't just physical. It's not just, oh, look, here we are and Jews are alive. It is also spiritual survival. It is our practices. It is our observance. It is our text that has sustained us. All of these things have made us get through difficult times, through hardship, distress, etc. We absolutely must not allow the pain of this year and the loss of this year to prevent us from dancing, which is what we do on Simchas Torah. Because if we do, then our Jewish spiritual survival is at risk, and we cannot allow that. So with all of this in mind, I will say we have no other choice but to dance. Open space for the pain, open space for the sadness. Let's remember this is a difficult time, and our joy is in certain ways mixed in with sorrow. But we cannot at all allow that sorrow to take over, and we have to be happy and we have to dance, even if we are honoring the two opposite feelings. We're good? Great.
Otherwise, we would have disappeared in 586 BCE.
Correct. Correct. We would have disappeared when the first temple was destroyed. We would have disappeared when the second temple was destroyed. We would have disappeared after all of the pogroms, or I mean, we could go back to Spanish expulsion, Inquisition. I mean, there's so many times. We haven't disappeared because we have continued to observe our traditions. That is fundamentally important. Thank you, Carolyn, for letting us know that Kululam will be in Del Rey. What upcoming program am I to announce, Kim? Is that my regular class?
Yes, your regular class is starting a week Tuesday, and we are keeping the same schedule. We have the same faculty. We just have a better infrastructure to support IJKL. Class pass is still honored. A la carte pricing will be available for your classes. If you need information, I think you do get it. If you're here, you've gotten it from somewhere. But we'll be sending out more information on how to get involved if we want to start our year with learning in heart and mind and with you.
Thank you, Kim. Yes, I am teaching a class on what the Torah says or doesn't say. So basically, we're going to be looking at mistranslation, misconceptions, things like that, that come from not understanding what the Torah really says. And I will say, Stephen, thank you for that comment. Yes, from COVID came Zoom. Now, I would rather not have had COVID, but from COVID came Zoom. If we think about this, in 2019, if Kim had said, we're going to have classes online, there would not have been a single person signing up for a class. Just say, right? But then 2020 happened and we had to be creative. And here we are 4 years later, still using Zoom because it allows us some amazing things, among which have made new friends and new learners that are coming from other parts of the country. They wouldn't be able to be with us if the classes were only in person. So yes.
Thank you for bringing some joy into our sorrow.
I have a new head.
As I said, if you need to sit on the floor as on Tisha B'Av, do it, and then get up and dance. That's exactly it.
You gave me a lot to think about tonight.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
Always give us a lot to think about, Marilyn. We missed you this summer. I'm glad your trips have been amazing, and you're looking forward to seeing you all on a week Tuesday.
Thank you, Pam. I hope to see many of you there.
Beautiful. What's the week Tuesday? Okay.